In the grand and brutal theatre of the Second World War, the narrative is overwhelmingly one of steel, fire, and the immense industrial might of nations. It's a story told through the thunder of bombing raids, the clash of armoured divisions, and the seismic political shifts that reshaped the modern world. Yet, hidden within the classified files of the British War Cabinet, tucked away from the public eye, lies a chapter of a very different sort. The British planned out an initiative to unleash a silent, creeping biological devastation upon Germany. The weapon conceived for this purpose was as ingenious as it was insidious. 5 million ordinary linseed cakes, the kind fed to cattle across the world, will each be carefully and secretly injected with a lethal dose of anthrax spores. By airdropping these poisoned treats over German pastures, Britain intended to trigger a nationwide agricultural collapse, crippling the German home front with a famine of unimaginable proportions. To test this theory, a horrifyingly successful experiment was conducted on a remote Scottish island named Grunard, which was promptly rendered uninhabitable for nearly half a century. This plan was given a code name that was, in its own dark way, brutally literal. The British called it Operation Vegetarian, because if you kill all of a nation's cattle, that is precisely what they become. This is the story of the plan Britain developed to turn Germany vegetarian against her will. To understand how a plan as audacious as Operation Vegetarian could ever be seriously considered, one must first appreciate the atmosphere in Britain during the early 1940s. The nation was fighting for its very survival. The Blitz had left cities scarred and battered. The Battle of the Atlantic was a desperate struggle against German U-boats to keep vital supply lines open. For a time, Britain stood almost entirely alone against the German war machine that had conquered most of Europe. In this atmosphere of profound and existential crisis, conventional thinking was a luxury the country could no longer afford. The government, led by the indomitable Winston Churchill, was receptive to any proposal, no matter how unorthodox, that promised a decisive edge. This search for an advantage led them to the gates of Porton Down. Situated on the quiet chalk downlands of Wiltshire, this was the UK's highly secretive chemical and biological weapons research establishment. At the helm here was Dr. Paul Fildes, a distinguished and formidable bacteriologist with a deeply pragmatic view of total war. Fildes wasn't a stereotypical mad scientist. He was a patriot who believed that in a fight against an enemy as ruthless as the Third Reich, clinging to conventional methods was a form of suicide. He championed the idea of biological warfare as a supremely effective strategic tool, a way to attack the enemy's economic and social foundation without the blunt force trauma of high explosives. The agent of choice for Porton Down became a Bacillus anthracis, the bacterium that causes the deadly disease, anthrax. It was exceptionally lethal, particularly when inhaled, but its most prized quality was its resilience. Anthrax forms spores, which are microscopic armor-plated survival pods. They can lie dormant in soil for decades, surviving heat, cold, and drought, patiently waiting to be ingested or inhaled by a host. While other biological agents might degrade, anthrax was, as Fildes saw it, a permanent solution. An attack using anthrax spores would not only kill in the short term, but would render pastures and farmland dangerous for generations. Operation Vegetarian weaponized the mundane, turning a staple of the agricultural world into a vector for disease. The delivery system was the linseed cake, a common, nutritious biscuit widely used as supplementary feed for cattle. To produce the vast quantities required, the government contracted a London company, J&E Atkinson, who were specialists in soap and animal feed. The factory workers were told only that it was an urgent government order, and the cakes were manufactured with a small cavity in the center ready for their lethal filling. From the factory, the cakes were transported under guard to Porton Down. In a building nicknamed the Anthrax factory, technicians in heavy rubber suits undertook the dangerous final stage. A precise amount of a potent anthrax slurry, using the infamous and highly virulent Volum 14578 strain, was injected into each cake's cavity. The whole was then carefully sealed with wax. The finished cakes were packed and stored in secure bunkers. By early 1944, the production run of 5 million anthrax-laced cakes was complete. But theory and lab work were one thing. A real-world demonstration was needed to confirm the weapon's terrifying potential before it could be loaded onto a bomber. For its crucial field test, the Ministry of Defense required a location that was both completely isolated and, to put it bluntly, entirely expendable. They found it in Grenard Island, a small, uninhabited and picturesque island off the northwest coast of Scotland. In 1942, the government requisitioned the island from its owners under the Defence of the Realm Act, informing them that it was needed for unspecified experiments of national importance and paying them a modest rental fee. That summer, the Porton Down team arrived, bringing their strange new weapons and the unfortunate test subjects, a flock of around 60 healthy sheep. The first test involved a 30-pound anthrax bomb, similar to one designed for use against cities, which was detonated upwind of a group of tethered sheep to test the effectiveness of aerosol disposal. The results were swift, as the animals began to show symptoms within a day and were all dead within 3, their lungs destroyed by pulmonary anthrax. The second test was for Operation Vegetarian proper. The contaminated linseed cakes were scattered across a pasture where the remaining sheep were grazing. The animals, seeing the familiar feed, readily consumed the treats. The outcome was just as the scientists had predicted. A swift and certain death, this time from gastrointestinal anthrax. From a cold, scientific standpoint, the experiment was an unqualified success. Dr. Fildes had his data. The weapon worked precisely and devastatingly as designed. However, the experiment had a rather significant and lasting side effect. The anthrax spores released from the bomb and from the decaying carcasses of the sheep had thoroughly contaminated the island. They seeped into the thin Scottish soil, turning the entire landscape into a persistent and lethal no-go zone. Government scientists quickly realized they had created a small-scale, permanent environmental catastrophe. As a result, the Ministry of Supply erected signs along the coast warning that this island is government property and dangerous. They officially declared it a prohibited area, which was a very polite way of saying it could kill any man or beast that set foot on it. With the weapon proven effective and the 5 million cake stockpile ready, Operation Vegetarian was set for deployment in spring 1944. RAF flight plans were meticulously drawn up and Lancaster bombers were on standby. Everything was in place. And yet, the order to attack never came. The British War Cabinet chose, in the end, to leave the terrifyingly effective weapon on the shelf. Several critical factors contributed to this decision. Primarily, the strategic landscape of the war had shifted dramatically. By 1944, the tide had decisively turned in the Allies' favor. The D-Day landings, the relentless Soviet advance, and Allied strategic bombings meant the desperate, back-to-the-war mentality that spawned the plan was fading. Victory through conventional means now seemed inevitable. There was also the paralyzing fear of retaliation. British intelligence knew of Germany's advanced chemical weapons program, including nerve agents like Tabun and sarin, for which the Allies had no effective defense. An anthrax attack on cattle might provoke a catastrophic nerve gas response on British cities, which leaders like Sir Alan Brooke felt was an unnecessary risk. Finally, a certain ethical queasiness came to the forefront. While total war had blurred many lines, unleashing a plague designed to cause mass starvation felt like a step too far. It was a weapon of absolute last resort, and as the Allies closed in on Berlin, it clearly wasn't needed. In late 1945, after the war's conclusion, the entire stockpile was discreetly transported to the furnaces at Porton Down and incinerated. The secret of Operation Vegetarian burning with it. While the weapon was gone, Grenade Island remained dangerously contaminated for decades. The government was only forced to act in the 1980s when a protest group, the Dark Harvest Commando, began mailing samples of toxic soil to sensitive targets, including Porton Down itself. This alarming tactic worked. A massive decontamination effort began in 1986, involving hundreds of tons of formaldehyde and the removal of most of the toxic soil. After a flock of sentinel sheep grazed unharmed, the island was declared safe in 1990. In a final stroke of bureaucratic absurdity, it was sold back to the original owner's descendants for the 1942 price of £500. Operation Vegetarian endures as a peculiar and chilling footnote in military history, a stark reminder of wartime desperation. But what do you think? Was the British government justified in creating such a horrifying weapon in the first place, given the nature of their enemy? Or was it a moral line that should never have been crossed, even in concept? Would they have deployed it if the war had still been going badly in 1945? Let us know your thoughts on this bizarre and chilling chapter of history in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.